Right, hello everybody. So this is a quick synchronous discussion to have a look at the need to, or the desire to provide an offline docs version. And so we're just going to brainstorm a few ideas and determine the next steps on what we want to do with regards to an R&D spike to see what the best solution might be going forward. Jacques, so over to you to give us some context.
Sure, let me just share my screen. Can you all see the agenda?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so let me just quickly take you through some of the differences between the docs.gitlab static website and the gitlab.com/help.
Before you do that, would you mind just zooming in a bit?
Yeah. How would I do that?
Go to view. Actually, no. There's a percentage drop down there. No, there next to the heading drop down. There's 100% there.
Oh, there you go. Got it.
Yeah.
I get it?
Maybe try 150. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, so the docs.gitlab static website is a separate website, but it gets the markdown content from the GitLab org GitLab project. So everything inside of this directory will get pulled into the GitLab Docs project, and it would be used to display or to generate all the markdown files into static pages. And then the documentation for all the GitLab applications gets hosted on the GitLab docs.gitlab.com project. So this includes GitLab, Runner, Omnibus, Charts, and all of the other applications. And it also supports multiple versions. So on the docs.gitlab.com project, there's just drop down where you can choose different versions. It's also feature rich and well maintained for the most part. And then looking over at the gitlab.com/help section, that contains all of the help, all of the markdown content that you find in here for that specific instance. But the problem is that it lacks the features of docs.gitlab.com. It's also not very well maintained.
I assume it also doesn't include the Runner, Omnibus, and Charts documentation.
That's correct, because those are all separate applications.
Okay.
So
can you open that link, that gitlab.com help link, to see what it looks like?
Yeah. So the biggest problem is that this help section doesn't look anything like the gitlabs.com website. And
okay.
So the main problem is that the GitLab air-gapped instances they only use this section for getting help for the application. But obviously they want all the UX and nice to haves of the GitLab Docs project.
So as far as I know, they also get rendered differently. They used, I remember seeing a conversation that they use different renderers for the documentation, the help one as well.
Yeah. Yes. So the docs.gitlab.com project is a static website. So all of the markdown files gets pre-compiled into HTML before it gets served. but the gitlab.com/help section, as far as I understand, it gets rendered on the fly by some Ruby controller.
So the content is the same, but the presentation of the documentation is different.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So what they want at the end of the day is for air-gapped instances to also have the same features as the docs.gitlab.com project. So we need to find a way to unify the two so that they both have the same features. At the end of the day, that's the biggest problem for us to solve. And then looking at the issue there's already some ongoing discussion in there, and two possible solutions came out of that. One is to offer the documentation site as a standalone service that an administrator can opt to deploy to their server or to their network. So this could include this could involve including the docs.gitlab.com container within the omnibus package. So essentially, we'll package the entire GitLab Docs project and give it to them as in a container so that they can deploy it on their server. The other solution is to update the methods for building the help section to more closely in line with that of the docs.gitlab project so that there's more feature parity between the two. For instance, we can, for instance, pull master of GitLab Docs into GitLab and serve it on a different port. So these are all just discussions that's been going on in the issue. So looking, yeah, any questions on that?
Yeah, so essentially the problem is we're maintaining trying to maintain two different things, but the main intention of this is to provide the documentation in an offline environment where in an air-gapped solution where there's no access to the internet and they can't access docs.gitlab.com, that they can at least access a version of the documentation on their network that is fully featured.
That's right. That's right. So there's also, so that is a big concern, but looking at the issue, we've also got some concerns of our own. For instance, currently the /help section doesn't give us the ability to, for instance, do includes, redirect, and search, whereas the docs.gitlab.com project gives us those abilities. So there's, yeah,
but
there's
now
a few things that we need to keep in mind.
Doesn't the search rely on an online service on docs.gitlab.com? I mean, it's a static site that has no built-in functionality, and I think it uses Algolia's search for that.
That's right. So all of these features are included in the docs.gitlab.com project, but they are not included in the /help section, for instance.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess from a search point of view, my first question is: can you host an Algolia instance yourself, or is it only online? Is it only like a SaaS offering? Because if we're using search for and it requires like an online connection, and they don't have an ability to host an instance yourself, but which is also I guess would be difficult because you probably need to pay to host an instance yourself and all those kind of things. So the search part is potentially a big deal breaker from a just in terms of the way the docs.gitlab.com works right now, which is a static site that gets generated, and then having that in an offline environment and providing search will be really tricky, which is why I guess the concept of expanding help hasn't been taken off the table, because that gives you a back-end runtime at least that you can use for dynamic features.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the outcomes from this R&D session is to obviously expose things like this and to break it down into deliverable chunks. So I would imagine that search would be one of the things that we need to split out into a separate issue so that we can properly investigate that and possibly do some spikes around it first.
Okay.
So for the purpose of the R&D, like I mentioned, breaking it down into deliverable chunks, but also mainly building knowledge in the domain and proposing solutions or expanding on existing ones. And also just answering the question whether or not we would need help from the pages team. It may very well be that this is a feature that the pages team would need to take over. But that's a question that we need to answer.
So with that, you mean like for instance, how you can host your a static site with in GitLab on a project kind of thing.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I assume that in a self-hosted instance, they have the same capability to do that on their own infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like the non-negotiables are almost a thing that needs to be defined to be able to know which direction to look into. If, for instance, search is a non-negotiable thing, and also if we do go down the road of making help more feature-rich and stuff, you know, like how do we share the effort across the two projects so that we don't end up having to maintain two separate systems as much as possible. Like for instance, when we have somebody contribute an improvement to the layout on docs.gitlab.com, you know, like how do we make sure that that can get carried over to help and so on. And also the other part is, you know, having to keep in mind, it's like when we had the C and E separate repos, you know, and we had to duplicate things across and so on. So, which is not ideal. So maybe the I guess the end result is maybe not having a docs.gitlab.com project in some way. Maybe just having the documentation part of GitLab in GitLab and having that as an output, be able to be hosted on docs.gitlab.com still from an output point of view. And that could, like you mentioned, that could be potentially a Pages project or a hosted project or something. I'm still a little bit vague in terms of just exactly what we need to, what the next steps are. But maybe Vasily, I'll give you a chance to voice some thoughts at this point.
So yeah, I actually agree with that having like two separate projects, it's not a great idea, because like right now we have one which is actively developed, another one which is maintained on a really low level. And we have this difference between the features. And even if we fix the GitLab.com help and provide some extra features to it, it will be still a problem. We'll need to constantly maintain, return back and update it. So I guess the right approach would be to aim for one single project that we can share. We can probably use to have like docs only, or to have a docs included into the GitLab. Like, I think it's up to us to decide. And for that, I think we need to figure out like how much effort we need to do to achieve. Like, I guess our goal is to have docs that users can use offline without internet connection, and the docs that have like lots of features that we want to provide as well.
Yeah, and obviously, sorry.
No, go for it.
Sorry, I just want to say, obviously, having to maintain just one code base would be the ideal outcome here, because it's getting more and more complicated to try and maintain these two different versions of our docs UI. So I think the ideal outcome would have, whether we include it in the GitLab project or still have it as a separate project and then package it within the GitLab project. I think the ideal outcome would be to have one code base that we need to maintain.
So what if we, for example, take the docs GitLab as an example, as a base, and we'll try to add this offline search to it and somehow ship it together with the GitLab product too. So we'll use the most modern version of our docs on one side, so we don't need to re-implement it. We just need to add the features that it's missing right now. So it's like...
Yeah, that can work. So we obviously also need to think of ways to cut it down into smaller deliverable chunks. And like I said earlier, I would imagine the search would be something that we need to do separately. And then perhaps, because currently there is a search function in the GitLab, as far as I know, /help. There is a search function, but I'm not sure whether or not it actually searches the documentation. So what I'm trying to say is we could even disable search for the initial iteration and then introduce it at a later stage.
Could you maybe do a quick test on the GitLab help / that search there, the global search we have? Just type in the CI configurations and see if it comes up with anything related to documentation potentially. So as far as I know, they're only indexing groups and projects and stuff in the Elasticsearch database. So we'd have to work with the search team to see if it's possible to index the documentation as well, because if we have, I mean, we've got a search functionality in GitLab, and so if we can include the documentation as part of the search results, that would be really useful.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So for the first iteration, we, by excluding the search capabilities of the docs, we actually won't be losing any features. But I think we should still enable the search functionality on the online version.
What about the documentation of the other things like omnibus, runner, and charts? Does that also have to be included in /help?
That is a good question. I think that's a question
and then also, I would imagine that a version dropdown wouldn't be necessarily appropriate, because you'd want the documentation relevant to the version that you're running on that instance. So it's not as simple as just, I guess, replicating what's in docs on docs.gitlab.com and putting it in the help site. Finding some sort of mechanism to share resources between the two, like layouts and styling and stuff, might be another approach that we look at. You know, maybe we could have a package that has the shared common things between the two. I'm not sure, yeah, because it's not as clean cut as just, you know, replicate GitLab.com, docs.gitlab.com functionality to help. There is some tweaks that would need to be made.
Yeah, I agree. And so obviously bringing the GitLab project into GitLab and having all the content displayed under the same domain is one solution. But the other solution is to redirect them to a different port altogether when they go to the help section. That would mean that we can run the entire GitLab Docs project in a separate container, in a separate instance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's essentially bundling the Docs project as part of the omnibus install.
That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think where the requirement of what needs to be visible on help really dictates which route we want to go, because if they want to have all the documentation from the other projects as well, like Runner and so on, because I could imagine that having Runner documentation would be helpful and stuff like that. Then you almost want to ship a Docs project with the omnibus and have that, you know, run as a container and something, and then where, you know, like you said, when they go to help, that it actually then renders this this embedded Docs containers output.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so there's definitely different ways we can approach this. And I think this is probably where a lot of our work would also lie in this R&D phase of it.
So for me, what it feels like is the first step is just to clarify on the exact requirements, because the requirements might short-circuit some of the effort we might need to put into to see, you know, how do we share layouts and styling between help and docs.gitlab.com and all those things. Because if the requirements become clear enough where it says, you know, actually we need a full-featured docs thing available offline, then it really starts pointing towards a single option of what is viable, which is embedding the docs project with the omnibus install. So I think the first step before we put real cycles into research and stuff is clarifying the requirements. So almost like on that issue that for this, you know, like summarizing the requirements and having the various stakeholders confirm that yes, this is the requirement, or no, you know, we can do without this, and so on. Like, what is the core minimum requirements and what is nice to have on this? Because right now it feels like, to me, there's not enough yet consensus on what the exact requirements need to be to really give direction in terms of which way to focus the R&D.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I think the next step, it sounds like we could probably pose some of the questions that came out of this session in the issue, just so that some of the stakeholders can give us some clarity on that before we go down a specific route.
Okay, cool.
And I have a question about the way how it works. So as far as I understood, the docs folder inside of the main GitLab repo, it's like a source of truth, and docs gitlab.com, they just pull this data from the main repo, or it works differently? Okay.
That's right. So during the build process, the docs project pulls all of the content in this folder in the GitLab project, and then it generates the static pages from the markdown files in this folder. So that, like you said, this is the source of truth for the docs content.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vasily, what
the
might
project is a wrapper around it.
Vasily, what might be helpful is if you, if you check out the docs.gitlab.com project and you follow the installation instructions to get it running locally, you get a really good feel for how it works to get it going, where literally all the repos, it pulls the various docs sections of those repos in, and then at build time it uses that.
Okay, I see. So it's
So
not only pulls the docs from the GitLab, it also pulls from other repos. That's repos, why we don't have runner, omnibus, and other. Okay, now I see.
Yes, okay. That's why. So on help, the current /help, it only shows the GitLab repos documentation, which is why I asked, would they want the runner documentation on help and all of those kind of things as well? Do they want a fully fledged docs.gitlab.com in an offline environment? Or is it only for the GitLab product? And if they need help for runner, would they be in a different app /help, for instance? So having a clear understanding of those requirements really differentiates between which way we go with the R&D.
Cool.
So yeah, I can pose us questions in the issue for us.
Okay.
And then maybe we can have a follow-up session once we've got some clarity on that.
All right, that makes sense. I'll upload this recording to GitLab Unfiltered as well. If anybody from the docs team wants to reference our conversation and questions to get some more context around it.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right.